For the next part of our in-depth look at layers, I want to talk briefly about the background layer. I'm going to go to File, New, and just create a brand new document, and by default this is going to come in with a background layer. Now, a background layer is a little different than any other type of layer in that it does not get moved around. It is currently locked into place, and we can't unlock it. We can't even play with any of the lock settings. We can't adjust the fill, we can't adjust the opacity. You have to think of this kind of like the very base of your document, the ground floor, and you can't go any deeper than this. The reason I like to just kind of make a special note about the background layer is you kind of have to watch yourself if you plan on doing any work actually on top of it. You can. I know folks who do all kinds of really cool paintings just by working with a single layer. But if I was to come in here and draw something like, you know, some guy, he's just kind of hanging out and his arms are folded and he's kind of like, you know, just staring at the world like, meh, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, if I want to make any changes to this guy, if I want to move him around, I can't because he's on a layer that is locked. He's on the background layer. I can't do anything. This is basically just like drawing right on top of a sheet of paper. You can't grab those individual brush strokes and really do a whole lot with them, not without doing some really clever Photoshop work. It's a whole lot more work than you might want it to be, which is why I strongly recommend that the background layer just be kind of like a backdrop, exactly what the name suggests, just something that you leave alone, which is just sitting back behind your image. So as an example, if I switch over to my eraser and I clean all this off, the way I traditionally like to work is to drop down even just a single layer and do all of my work on that instead. So if I do something very similar, and this guy's maybe a little happier than the last guy, he's just chilling. And he of course he's happier because he's on his own layer. He can be moved around, and while I haven't really talked about all this kind of stuff, he can be transformed, he can be rotated, we can just make him, you know, kind of lay down and put his feet up. We can do all kinds of things with this guy that we can't do as long as he's on a background layer. Now that doesn't mean that your background layer always has to be a background layer. If I go to File, Open, and grab, say, our koala picture, which came along with Windows 7, you'll notice that the image by default, since it has no layers, just has a background layer. I can double-click a background layer, and it turns into a new layer window, or basically we get the new layer window when I double-click on this. I can give this a name. I'm just going to leave it at layer 0 and click OK, and now this can be moved around. It's just another layer. It is no longer a background. However, at some point you might think to yourself, well, wait a minute, what if I want my background back? Well, you could just treat layer 0 like a background. However, there are a couple of features within Photoshop which specifically make reference to the background layer, and if you don't have one, those features get omitted. I'll talk about some of those as we move forward. They particularly have to do with some of the advanced blending options, so at least you've heard me say that. What I'm going to do, though, is show you how to switch this back over. With this layer selected, we can go over to New, Background from Layer, and that turns that right back into a background layer. So again, it was just a very brief video. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. I just kind of want to stress the dangers of working strictly on the background layer, because you lose the ability to make any kinds of changes, especially if you find that you don't like something. It's a lot easier to just turn off a layer or delete it altogether than it is to try to go through and meticulously change some part of an image. One of the things I like to stress to folks, especially if they're doing things like photo work, is whenever possible, try to work in a non-destructive fashion. Don't make any changes you don't have to your original image. So if we wanted to take our koala and make him, give him like a red spot up here on his head, then we could, of course, just paint that right onto the koala's background image, and I'll show you how to do that real quick. Even though it does kind of branch a little bit beyond the scope of everything I wanted to talk about, we'll do it anyway. I'll pick some nice shade of red, and then here in my paintbrush, I'm going to set my mode over to color, and I'll make my brush nice and big. Or at least I'll try to make my brush nice and big. There we go. And there we go. We've got a red spot. Actually, we could do that a whole lot better, probably by switching over to multiply. There we go. So he's got a red spot on his fur now. The problem is I can't get rid of that red spot unless I undo. So if I do a whole bunch of work, at some point that's not going to be able to be removed in any way. So what I like to do is make sure that all of those kinds of changes take place instead on their own layer. So I could create a brand new layer, switch the layers mode over to multiply, and I can paint and I get the exact same result. the cool thing about doing this is I can move this spot around. We can put it right over his eye if we want. We can change its opacity if we want to, or we can just hide it out altogether. We have a lot more flexibility and freedom. So that is going to wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot.